All right, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, welcome in. In this video, we're going to be discussing pHEX. Is this a new beginning for what was the highest appreciating asset of 2020? And going into the second half of 2021, we'll see if it continues that absolute dominance in the crypto space. So let's get right into it. First of all, I have some notes here to make sure we cover everything. This is the first time we've covered pHEX on the channel. There's a lot to say, and I've been hesitant to talk about it because there's a lot we don't know, and it's you'll understand in a bit. So first of all, what is pHEX, right? What is pHEX? So it's going to be a hard fork of Hex. How? Well, because PulseChain itself is a hard fork of Ethereum, bringing the full system state with it, meaning all of the, current variables, all of the share rate is coming along for the ride. Your balances, right? How much Hex you have staked and liquid, that's coming along for the ride. All of your ERC20s, for that matter, are coming along for the ride. Even dexes, right? Things like Uniswap and there's a lot, and we don't actually know everything that's going to be forked or coming along for the ride, or actually people building on PulseChain. That's kind of a wild card as well. But for the most part, we are getting, the entire system straight. System straight. We're getting the entire system state of Ethereum, and that includes all the ERC20s. So therefore, Hex is an ERC20 and will be forked as pHEX on the new chain. So what is it? It's going to be a fully proof of stake coin, and I love this, right? Because our inflation in Hex is proof of stake. However, our consensus network, right, transactions, is proof of work because it's built on Ethereum. It's an ERC20. However, once pHEX is live on PulseChain, well, PulseChain is a proof of stake consensus mechanism. It's something like proof of stake authority. It's a little more technical and complicated. Just go to the GitLab. It's gitlab.com/pulsechain.com, and you can go into the README file there, and it explains everything about the consensus mechanism that's used and all of the technical details. So go there if you want to learn more about that. But for the most part, all you really have to know is that the consensus mechanism, right, your layer 1 PulseChain, will be proof of stake. And if you have a proof of stake for inflation coin built on a proof of stake consensus network, you have a fully proof of stake coin. So pHEX will be a fully proof of stake coin, and I absolutely love that from all layers. So you don't introduce a negative externality of miners, right? So I love this already. Now, the thing people care about is price. What will be the price of pHEX? Well, at launch, when mainnet goes live, this is just my theory, right? When mainnet goes live, you essentially have a bunch of pairs, right? You have all the pairs that exist on Uniswap. So pHEX PLS, pHEX PUSDC, and all of those pairs for all ERC20s for that matter. But they're valueless. They haven't been traded for dollars. So in theory, once the mainnet actually goes live, everything will be valueless. Okay? Now, there's going to be, from what we've heard, there's going to be a balancing contract where upon the launch of mainnet, this contract will mint a certain percentage of the Pulse supply, and this percentage is based on an estimate, right? So let's just roll back a little bit and let me explain something. So on Ethereum, there's about 5% of all Ethereum as wrapped Ethereum. And what that suggests is that 5% of all of Ether is in AMMs, also known as automated market makers like Uniswap. And so if 5% of all of Ether is in AMMs, then in theory, 5% of all Pulse should be in AMMs to maintain the landscape, I guess, so that it makes sense, right? It's sort of a sanity check. And so since the pulse of supply will be so much more since the supply of Pulse will be so much more plentiful than supply of Ethereum by a minimum factor of 10,000x, and it's looking like it might actually be closer to 100,000x, then it doesn't make sense to have the scale of the pools that would exist in Uniswap at the moment of the fork, right? So one example, let's just give you one example. Let's pull up Hex USDC, all right? So we can take a look at what these pools look like. So you have about $7 million of USDC and about 50 million Hex. Now, I think a better example would actually be something like Hex ETH, all right? Because we know, yeah, this is a much better example. So on the Hex ETH pair, you have about 9.5 million Hex on the Hex side and about 624 ETH on the ETH side. So 624 divided by the actual total circulating supply of Ethereum is a greater percentage than 624 Pulse over, 100,000x the supply of Ethereum. So you're off by a whole factor of about 100,000x, and therefore everything immediately on Uniswap would just be super illiquid, if that makes sense, if this balancing contract weren't to come in. So what the balancing contract is going to do is it's going to mint about, I think, 2.5% of the Pulse supply and simply put that into AMMs, right? It's going to buy up the PRC20s and bring them to a level where they're more liquid. What this means for liquidity providers currently on Uniswap is that you'll be essentially given more Pulse in your position and less PRC20, right? Because the way LPs work is that you're pretty much buying up the coins that are going down while simultaneously selling the coins that are going up. And this is just the I guess the effect of the way liquidity provision works. You're essentially giving the market your coins to play with, and so the way ratios work in AMMs means that your ratio will change with the market. So you'll be getting more of the cheap coin and less of the expensive coin. So this means that you'll be getting less of the PRC20 in your pair, and you'll be getting more Pulse as a liquidity provider. If you're currently providing liquidity on Uniswap, then that will be the case once the fork happens and this contract comes in to balance things. And so what we know so far is that these PRC20s that have been harvested from the AMMs on PulseChain will actually be injected into another AMM potentially. And this isn't a requirement for launch, by the way. This is kind of the extra fun stuff. But let's say there's a fork of Uniswap on PulseChain that is something more like those. I don't want to name these other AMMs, but there are AMMs out there where by providing liquidity, not only are you earning fees, but you're also liquidity mining. You're also being incentivized with certain tokens, right? Certain tokens. And so if you provide liquidity on a, PRC20 PLS pair, then the incentive on that could be to mine these PRC20s that have been harvested, assuming they're injected with the proper kind of logic and contracts into a fork. So that's kind of a fun mechanic, but I just think it's interesting to note that this balancing contract will come in and effectively pump all the PRC20s. Like we're hearing this terminology of harvesting the PRC20s, but it's essentially buying them up to kind of fix the rates and the ratios in the pools. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting for sure to see how this all plays out. Again, I don't claim to be an expert on all of this stuff or know what's going to happen, but I'm just providing, I guess, the info and some insights so you guys can kind of keep the conversation going, because I'm sure a lot of you have some really good insights on a lot of the points I'm saying. So definitely feel free to comment them. Always stoked to hear what you guys have to say. But yeah, I have a few notes here, again, just so I don't forget everything, because there's so much to say about pHEX. Well, this is an interesting point. The main liquidity pair on Ethereum right now for Hex is USDC. So once the fork occurs, Once the fork occurs, that's going to be the thickest liquidity pair as well. And assuming this balancing contract goes in and buys up PRC20s according to the size of their pools, then it would still be the thickest. And I don't know, maybe maybe USDC pairs are treated differently because we don't know the value of a PUSDC. So that'll be interesting to watch and really see what the thickest liquidity pair is going to be for pHEX. Now, assuming it is something like PLS, where pHEX PLS is your thickest pair, whether artificially made to be so or not, let's just assume that's the case. Then there's this idea, right, that if two things are interchangeable, their prices are bonded, right? And the more interchangeable they are, like for example, if you had 100% liquidity of one thing on a certain pair, then in theory their prices would be bonded, right? So if you have pHEX PLS as your thickest pair, then you would think, right? You would think that as PLS moves, pHEX would pretty much just be a play on that. It would be the same chart, more or less, assuming little to no trading between pHEX and PLS itself. So that will be interesting to watch how that dynamic plays out. Now, here's another thought. So on that point, that if two coins are interchangeable via liquidity, that their prices are bonding, a question that arises is, does it work the same via pairs bonded in a bridge? I just think that's an interesting question because you see it with something like wrapped Bitcoin, where you send a Bitcoin to a certain counterparty and they issue you a wrapped Bitcoin on the Ethereum network, and a wrapped Bitcoin holds its peg of a Bitcoin. So, and again, that's a different mechanism, right? It's a different mechanism than an actual liquidity pair, right? A bridge and a liquidity pair are two very different things, obviously, but in both scenarios, you have two coins whose values are bonded via interchangeability. So if the interchangeability is the actual fundamental part of it, then based on first principle thinking, a liquidity found in a bridge would act similarly. So that brings me to this next topic, that if we only have a main bridge being your ETH to Pulse, then you might not see pHEX reach parity with HEX immediately, or ever. Like, is it going to ever? I don't know. That's speculation. But the interesting thought to me is, what if there's a direct bridge opened from HEX to pHEX, where, you know, there's a certain pool set up initially where you simply send HEX to the bridge contract on Ethereum, and it would essentially lock that in the contract and issue you a pHEX, right? Obviously, it can't mint that, but if given a sizable pool, then it might be able to do that. And in theory, that would bond their prices if they were interchangeable 1-to-1. So that's just a thought there. If a direct bridge is opened up from HEX to pHEX, we could see something like that happen, and you could see pHEX reach parity, meaning the same price as HEX, and literal exact same price, very, very quickly. Now, again, I'm no expert, so I don't know if that's actually a thing you can do. Like, maybe a wrapped HEX on PulseChain is different than a pHEX. So a lot of questions to be answered. Again, I don't claim to be an expert, so definitely keep the conversation going, especially if you have insight, in the comments below. But just some final two thoughts on some speculation is, you kind of have both sides. You have the bull case and you have the bear case. So take it as you will and interpret this how you will, but could we see an initial market dump? Yeah. Could you see an initial market pump? Sure. We'll go over each a little bit, and then we'll finish off the video. But the case for the bear case, right, is pretty simple. And it's, if you hold liquid HEX right now, you will get that copied over as liquid pHEX on PulseChain. Immediately you have a plethora of just free airdropped coins ready to be dumped, to be completely honest. Now, depending on the price of pHEX, if it's really low, maybe that's less of an incentive for people to dump. And so whatever price is, once the dexes are live and you're actually able to trade, I want to hold off from saying once mainnet goes live, because of that contract that's going to go in and harvest the PRC20s. So after that, and after you have access to your tokens and able to actually go into a DEX and swap them and whatnot, once that's the case, what the price of pHEX will be, I have no freaking clue. And no one probably does. So if anyone tells you they do, probably run away, because again, never financial advice on this channel. I'm just sharing my thoughts. This is just entertainment. So could there be an initial market dump due to just a bunch of free coins hitting the market? Sure. But it could also be disincentivized by a low price. But as price increases, if it does, right, then you could, in theory, see the incentive to dump increase as well. Now, what's the bull case? Well, what can you do with your Bitcoin? The main use case for Bitcoin, or as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, is to buy altcoins. So you could make a similar thesis for when people get their PLS. So the moment that you're able to access your coins, swap them, etc. on a DEX, then you will be able to use your PLS. Now, what will be the main use case for your PLS? Well, maybe to buy PRC20s. It seems to be that we already have the community bootstrapped, primarily the HEX community. Obviously, PulseChain is super popular, more than HEX, and so we do have more communities, right? It's not all just HEX guys. But there is a vast amount of those guys who are probably wanting to buy pHEX. So that'll be a primary use case, in my opinion, right? This is just my opinion. I think buying pHEX will be a very, very solid use case for the PLS itself. So that's the bull case, that when you have your PLX, well, or PLS, what are you going to do with it other than just hold it? Some people might just buy a pHEX. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, whether we see a dump. I know I don't know, I'm not going to say that, but I have a very strong feeling there's going to be high volatility in the first few days. Very, very strong inkling, but what do I know, right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on all of these points. There's a lot to say. Leave a like, because I've been so hesitant to drop a video on pHEX, and I mean, that's just it. I'm dropping it here for you now. So definitely leave a like and subscribe. We're almost at 4,000 subs, you guys. So crushing it with that. Let's keep it up. Let's keep going. Growing like 1,000 a month. So you guys are killing it. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate you watching. Share the video, all that good stuff. And I will catch you in the next video. Peace.